For the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about the time before the Mashiach, and I have been trying to go, very detailed, quite detailed into the.
Could you speak louder?
Could I speak louder? Yes.
Yes.
And I have been going over, just many different ideas about what the end of time, really, that's really what it is, what the end time environment is, and I've gone through many different ideas, and what I want to do is continue, because as you will notice, especially from this year, we are literally in the end of time when you begin to realize what is happening. In any case, in order to understand a lot of the ideas, you need to understand this introduction. We know that Adam HaRishon, the first man, was created, obviously, to declare his belief in one God. It's basically what it is. And therefore he's commanded, of course, not to eat from the tree of good and evil. And by his not eating from the tree, he would acknowledge that God is the only one that exists in that sense. And of course that his will is the only will to be observed. This is what Adam is given. However, so therefore he would merit to have a future world through merit, which is chut or schus. Anyway, what we find, however, is, of course, everybody knows that he sinned, which means that he ate from that tree, you see. And therefore we know also that the subsequent action by God is that he said, on the day that you eat from that tree, you will die. And not only that, he was evicted from Gan Eden, because that's really what it was. It was Gan Eden, you see. Now we look at that as, well, that's the punishment, right? He violated, disobeyed God, and as a result of that, he was subject to death, which eventually he did die, but obviously a long time after that, for another 930 years. But obviously at the same time, he was evicted from Gan Eden, you see. Now, when we look at these two things that happened, one is the subject to the death penalty, and the second thing is the eviction from the Garden of Eden, from Gan Eden. What are we to learn from this? Like I say, most people look at it as some type of a punishment. That's not really what it is. What it is the model of what man has to do to rectify creation. It's a very important idea. Therefore, when Adam HaRishon was commanded not to eat from the tree, he was obviously supposed to do the tikkun, which is the rectification, which means that God would now re-enter creation. But the way he was supposed to do it was, of course, schut or schus or merit. And that's how he's able to bring that about. However, he didn't. So, like I say, he was sentenced to a death penalty, and he was evicted. What is the meaning of that? Is that a punishment? Well, what it really is method B. It's the second way of doing tikkun. That's really what it is, you see. And what that meant is that there are two ways to do the tikkun. And like we see, this was already, used or inscribed in the entire method of how to do the tikkun, you see. And therefore, we now understand that there are two methods to do tikkun. One is to obey the will of God, to do what's called the mitzvot. And the second thing, right, if you don't do the mitzvahs, then the second way is death and eviction. But what is eviction really? Well, guess what? That is golus. It's galut. That's what eviction really is of Adam HaRishon. In fact, we can actually say that the first one to be sent into exile is Adam Rishon and his wife. That's really what the eviction is. Because death, which is of course the ultimate Yisurin, or suffering, and the eviction, which is the ultimate Golus, those are the methods of tikkun if a person does not do it in the prescribed way, which is of course doing the mitzvot or earning a future world through merit. Now, this is in many ways, a very important idea, you see. Now, besides the fact that there are two methods, I had mentioned, many times, that in the beginning, the tikkun consisted of bringing down the divine presence. There was no thing as evil in the creation itself. It existed in the form of a snake, but that snake was external to the world that Adam inhabited. But when he sinned, you see, he gave power or existence to that snake, which of course is the representation of the Satan. And as a result of that, which I had mentioned many times, man's purpose now is to remove evil from the world. Because by buying into the argument that he presented, then evil itself became part of the fabric of the world itself. So we now see, basically, that there are two methods of tikkun. Either obeying the commandments or suffering and golus. Those are the two ways. And we now understand also that there are two objectives. The first one was to do the mitzvot. And the second one, of course, is when he did not do the mitzvot, he did an avera, he sinned. Then the second objective, of course, is suffering. Or rather, the objective is to contend with the Satan and to destroy him. These are very important ideas because they outline the entire future of the history of man. And with this, we can begin to understand, as I will show you, the climate of today. When we look around today, we're just absolutely amazed at the deterioration of mankind, the deterioration of civilization. Now, what we see is a continuation of these ideas, because when God appeared to Avraham Avinu, right, of course, he designated Avraham Avinu and his descendants as the one to do the tikkun. And what does that mean? Of course, we now know the second objective is to contend with the Satan and to destroy him, which I have mentioned many times. And but Avraham Avinu, he assumed, okay, I will now try to rid the Satan of whatever divine energy, which we know is the sparks of holiness, take it away from him, right, which he gets as a result of the sins of man. But what is interesting, of course, is what God said. No, what you have to do is not just remove what the Satan has from here on in, but you have to remove for 2,000 years of mankind sinning. And the Satan has an enormous amount of sparks of holiness as a result of the sins of man for 2,000 years. And of course we know, which I had mentioned, that was the purpose of entering Egypt. What they did is they had to enter Egypt, right? And of course, they would have to remain Gerim, as God says to Avraham Avinu, Ger Yizaracho, Be'eretz Asher Lo Lahem. In other words, they will remain as Gerim, which means they should not assimilate and sin in the nation that they will be put into. Rather, what should they do? They should remain Gerim, which is don't assimilate, and do whatever commandments you have to do. But what happens if they don't? Then we have the concept of suffering. Avodum, then they will serve, which then came out to be the Egyptians, or V'inu Isam, or they will afflict them. You see. So those are the basic two methods of tikkun, which we know. And in other words, as I pointed out a long time ago, there are three methods of tikkun. One is mitzvot, to do the mitzvahs. The second is tshuva, to repent if you did a sin. Or yisurin, suffering. So suffering also does a tikkun. Now, what is interesting is how does suffering do a tikkun? Just because a person suffers, does that mean he can rectify the situation? And the answer is yes. And it works like this. Because when a person sins, there are two things that he derives, or two things that is stated. One is the concept, right, of pleasure. When you do a sin, it's almost always in order to achieve some type of pleasure. The second thing is that it is a statement of Yeshod Muvadoi, that besides God, there's also me, you see. It's a way of declaring a person's independence from God, or actually it's a way of saying that he also exists by himself. Every sin is a testimony, what's called Yeshod Muvadoi. Besides God, there's also another, and that is the person doing the sin. Therefore, what God does in order to remove the sin, you need to remove those two elements. The first element, of course, is pleasure that you get from sinning. So that is removed by its opposite, which is suffering. So therefore, suffering cancels out the pleasure that a person would have received by doing the sin. But the second element is what? Is when a person does sin, he declares Yeshod Muvadoi. Besides God, right, there's somebody else, and that is me. So what God says is, here's what I will do. There are two concepts in besides God, there is me, right? That there is no God, and also that I exist independent. So what God says, I'm going to put you into a state where clearly you will see that you're nobody. Now, when a person suffers, right, he doesn't want the suffering. That's the last thing he wants. I mean, if you go to a hospital and you see people in the hospital and they're in their beds and they're all, plugged into all kinds of things, right? That's the greatest proof that they're nobody. Because if they were somebody, then why don't they just get off the bed and walk out, leave the hospital? But it indicates it removes what's called the illusion of omnipotence. The fact that this person thinks he's somebody. That's what suffering does. It removes the illusion of being somebody. And it shows you in the end that you're nothing. Because if you was somebody, if you did exist independent, so why can't you just leave the hospital? You see. So therefore suffering is a tikkun. Because what it does, one, is that it confiscates the pleasure that you had by sinning. And the second thing, it shows you that you're nobody. You see? And that is part of tshuva, to realize that you're a nobody, you see, and that you're completely subject for your existence on the will of God. That's what suffering does. And that is why suffering is a third method of tikkun, you see. So we now understand the reasoning that the essential idea is to declare Einod Mavadoi. That's the essential conflict of man. Who is the boss? Who really exists? And so on. And therefore, there are three ways. Either you observe the commandments, which is a testimony that God exists, you see, and he's the real being that controls everything, and he is everything. Or you do tshuva, in which you regret that you sinned, which is another statement that God is everything. Or you suffer, which is a denial of your own power and might, and it cancels out the pleasure. You see, all of it is related to your testimony about, or rather your belief about what you think you are and who God is, you see. And that's really the model of Egypt, where they were supposed to be ger, which means do not assimilate, right, and just remain doing the commandments, whatever, 7 Noahide commandments. And if they don't do that, then the tikkun will be brought about through suffering, which is avodim. They will serve them, ve'inu oisam, and the Egyptians will afflict them. You see, so those are the three ideas: mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin. In any case, so but we understand the method, but the key concept or the objective, of course, is to annihilate this force, evil force called the suffering, called the Satan. And that's really basically what the entire journey of man really is. Now, where do we see this also? Like I showed you, it's by Adam Rishon, right? And it's also by Avram Avinu. But there's also another place that we see it. What is that place? The Gemara Brochus in Masechta Brochus, okay, in the third blot, Amud Aleph. It's a very interesting story where it says Rabbi Yossi went into a churva of one of the churvas, one of the places that are destroyed, ruins of Jerusalem, and he went in to pray. And while he was praying, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, right, who obviously Rabbi Yossi used to see quite often, you see, he waited outside for Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi then came out and they had a discussion about the proper way of praying and so on. But in any case, so then Eliyahu said to him, when you were in that room, Churva, did you hear a voice? So Rabbi Yossi says, yes, I actually heard a baskol, right? I heard a heavenly voice, you see, and that heavenly voice was God. And what did God say? Woe to the children, it's terrible to the children, due to whose sins I destroyed my house, I burned my temple, and I exiled them among the nations. This is what God says. So Eliyahu said to him that you should know that this voice, this statement, is said 3 times every day. You see, every day, which means that it's constantly on the mind of God, the fact that he destroyed his house, his temple, and he sent his children in exile, you see. And then the Gemara says that again, God says, how great is the pain of God who exiled his children, you see, and woe to the children who were exiled from their father's table, you see. Now, when it says my house, obviously, that means the Beis HaMikdash, right? My temple is the Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount, right? And exile, of course, means the Golus among the nations of the world. So the question that we have to, think about is what exactly is God saying? What does he mean when God says, right? Woe is me that I have exiled my people, burnt my house, and so on. What is he really saying? What he's really saying is what I have mentioned, is that until now, primarily, the method of tikkun of the Jewish people was primarily, right, the concept of schus, because they're in Eretz Yisrael, right? They have the Beis HaMikdash, they have Jewish kings. So basically, they're in their country and they're doing the tikkun through the method of schus, of merit, and of course also with tshuva. But the sins of the Jews are so bad that I now have to put them into method B, which is what? Which is Yisurin, suffering, and Golus, eviction from Eretz Yisrael, you see. And that's what God was bemoaning, that until now, at least I gave them a chance to be in their own country, because remember, this was before the destruction of the first temple, and even with the second temple, there was a second temple in Eretz Yisrael. So essentially what was happening is that they could do the tikkun, the rectification, through how? Through mitzvahs, right, and tshuva. But now I've destroyed my temple, right, Beis HaMikdash. I've removed the Shekhinah, which is, of course, the divine presence, and therefore the tikkun is now going to come not so much through schus, but through suffering and exile. That is what God is bemoaning, because he now has to resort to method B, which is that suffering and exile. That's what we see again from the Gemara. Now, these are very important ideas. Now, when it's said that the Golus is now going to come through what? Through the method B, which is Yisurin, right? You have to understand it's not just Yisurin, but what will come ultimately is also Chishech, darkness, which is a different factor than suffering. So there is suffering, and there's also darkness, you see. And they both accomplish what they have to do, you see. So we now realize something very important, that the tikkun itself comes through Yisurin, suffering, and darkness. That is the method of tikkun. But darkness and Yisurin have different levels. It's a very important idea, and the more the Jews sin, the greater is the level of darkness, you see. And, I could just spell out several of them. The different levels of darkness and suffering. One is when there is no temple. There's no Beis Hamikdash. So that's one level of darkness. The second is that even though there's no temple, but they're still in their land, and the one who dominates them is the Erev Rav. That's another level of darkness. Another level of darkness, the third level, is where they go into exile, and they are subject to the culture of the nation that they are in, which provides a tremendous distraction. And it's very hard to be oived, to really stick to the mitzvahs, because you're so distracted and tempted by the culture of the nation that you're in when you're in exile, you see. The next level of darkness is when that nation, you see, begins to prevent your ability to observe the mitzvahs. Remember, you could be in a nation, and it's okay, you can do whatever you want. But the fact that you're in a nation itself subjects you to the temptations and the ideas of their culture. However, that nation itself can now prevent you from observing the mitzvahs. So that's a fourth level of evil or darkness or suffering. You can have a fifth level of evil, where not only do they prevent your observance of the mitzvahs and distract you because of their culture, but they begin to kill you. That's real persecution, where they actually kill you, you see. So we're talking now about a tremendous amount of evil and harm, you see. And another level of evil, which is deadly, which I'm going to point out, who did it, is when the killing becomes a campaign. And that's what we saw in the Holocaust. In any case, what it means is that the desire to destroy the Jews, to murder them, actually becomes pervasive and prevalent all over, and it actually becomes an active campaign. That's the greatest level of darkness that you can imagine, you see. Now, we know, in what's called the Mem Teshari Tumah, the 49 levels of Tumah, of defilement, you see. We know that. And we also know from previous Shurim that when mankind and the Jewish people reach the Mem Teshari Tumah, God will not tolerate that, because he does not want the Jewish people to slip into the 50. So therefore, I use the expression, he's going to press the restart button, which is what he does. Now, in the beginning, by the Mabul, when mankind had descended into a terrible level of promiscuity and evil, right? he decided to destroy the world. But as I mentioned, I think in the last year, right, that was the only time he did to destroy the entire world. And he swore never to do that again, you see. But this is what he does. We, however, are now in that level of tumah. Yes, we have descended, mankind, and along with mankind, a great deal of the Jewish people, unfortunately, have descended into the Memtes, into the 49 levels. Therefore, the level of darkness is staggering. This is what happens, you see. Now, as a result of that, we have now been seeing terrible things for the Jewish people, that there's a great deal of suffering, certainly from COVID, and in general there's a great deal of suffering, and sicknesses, and divorces, and death, and so on, bankruptcies, all kinds of things that Jewish people are beset with, and so on. We find even now in the story of Meron, where the Jews, where a select number of Jews were killed. This is Meron. We find the same thing happen again later. Stalin in Erev Shavuos, in Stalin, where the bleachers of the students got collapsed. And now we find again, unfortunately, another collapse in Florida. So there's no question that there's a lot of serious suffering going on, you see. In any case, we have now reached the climate of the 49th level, you see. Now, what is very important is that there's a unique type of darkness that happens as a result of the climate of the end. What is that unique climate? Well, once God has pressed the restart button to bring the Mashiach, and he has now introduced suffering and darkness, that darkness is a unique form, you see. Now, when the Mashiach comes, what will be revealed? Einod Muvadoi, that besides God there is nothing else. That is the essential consciousness that people will have, and that is the essential revelation that people will have, Einod Muvadoi, because that is the Messianic light, you see. Therefore, what God does is, since that will be the ultimate, undoing of the evil of mankind, therefore the climate in the end has to be a climate of Yeshod Muvadoi, which is the exact opposite, where mankind is introduced, or the environment of evil is so great that mankind is buttressed in terms of Yeshod Muvadoi, where he thinks that he is the boss, he is the true power of everything. And this is what happens. This is the essential climate before the Mashiach comes, where mankind is given the temptation and the test to think that he is supreme, you see, and that God either does not exist or God is completely powerless to do anything. So what God does is gives mankind the illusion, you see, that he is a supreme being before the Mashiach comes. That is a very important concept, because that's one of the ideas that tells you that we are at the end, you see. And I'm going to, in many ways, demonstrate that, you see, how we see that. The truth is, well, let me point this out. One of the essential ideas in that climate of Yeshod Muvadoi, that's besides God, there is nobody else, right? But man is supreme. As part of that concept, that man begins to think that he's supreme, and in some way he is aided to believe this because things seem to go his way, you see. As part of that, the opposite also occurs, where there's an enormous, what's called Chil Hashem, desecration of God. In other words, the event shapes itself in such a way where not only mankind thinks that it is supreme, but that God is either non-existent or completely powerless. And the more you think that God is powerless, obviously, that intensifies the belief that you think you're supreme. And that is the real test that occurs before the Mashiach, you see. In other words, the darkness is so deep, is so profound, that you are now in an environment, a test, where you think you're supreme and that God is non-existent. That's the climate that you find yourself in at the end of time. And when did that really start? Well, it's really been going on in a certain way through history, but it really intensifies from World War I, from 1914. There are hundreds and hundreds, I think the number is even 1,500 Jewish communities that were destroyed in World War I. It was a tremendous slaughter of the Jews. Nothing compared to World War II, the Holocaust, but it was a tremendous destruction of the Jewish way of life. It was radical, extreme, where the Jews were either destroyed, especially the communities that the Jews were in were destroyed. So what happens is when Goyim see Jews die, when a Goy sees that the Jew is not successful at all and that you can kill him, that is the beginning of an incredible desecration of the existence of God, which is the climate before Mashiach. So in many ways it started with World War I, you see. And like I said, that is the central climate or environment or test before the Mashiach comes. Now, the second time is the Holocaust. The Holocaust was highly unusual because in a 6-year period from 1939 until 1945, 6 million Jews were killed, which is unheard of. It is probably for no reason other than the fact that they were Jewish, obviously. It is probably the greatest crime ever committed by the Jewish people. There are crimes which are interesting, which are greater than that. For instance, they say Mao Zedong, the head of China, that his policies, economic policies, killed or starved more than 100 million Chinese, and even Russia, under Stalin, killed millions and millions of Ukrainians and so on. He just starved them to death and so on. So there are crimes when greater numbers were, perpetrated. But in terms of Jewish numbers, 6 million Jews in the space of 6 years, it's probably the greatest anti-Semitic crime ever committed by the Jewish people. But not only does it allow or remove the Jews and their spirituality, but it also gave the Goyim the illusion that God is dead, God forbid. Because how would a king allow his prince to be abused, to be killed, to undergo suffering? Of course not. And if a person will make the prince suffer, isn't that the greatest proof that the king is impotent? Same idea. Everybody knows what it says in the Bible, the Torah, that the Jews are the chosen people, that the Jews are not only chosen, but they are the messengers to the world, that there is a God, there's morality, there's holiness, there's righteousness. Everybody knows that the Jews are what God uses as the agents for this message. And everybody knows that God says, you are my children, and I'm your father. So therefore, they all know that. So if that's the case, when the Jews are slaughtered without restraint, en masse, what do you think people think about God? They say, God? What God? Would he have allowed, if he existed, would he have allowed the Jewish people to be slaughtered like that? Of course not. So either they believe that God does not exist, or he's completely impotent and they could do whatever they want to the Jew, or even they could live whatever sample, lifestyle they want. What is so unusual about the Holocaust, which I find to illustrate this, is that the Jew was killed, but not just killed. Every part of his body was used. It's like he was an animal. You take an animal, you use his skin for leather, you use his fats, you use his bones, right? You use his meat. It's completely a usable item. Well, the same thing with the Jew. His skin was made into lampshades. The fat of the Jew was made for soap, right? And then, of course, they burnt the Jew completely. They took his jewelry. They took the gold out of his teeth. It's almost like the Jew is an animal that could be completely abused, right, and decimated by the goy. You see? You don't find that usually. Usually when people kill people, they just kill them. But the Jew became a commercial item. It's astounding. Why? Because that illustrates the ultimate test where God allowed mankind to think that he can do this to the Jewish people, his people, and get away with it. And therefore they would think, well, who is God? Where is he? Why doesn't he come and stand up for his people? Obviously, either he doesn't exist, or if he does, he's very powerless. That's why the Holocaust was among the greatest examples ever known for the Chil Hashem, for desecration of God's name. Very important idea. But that continues. This climate of Yeshud Muvadoi, where mankind thinks that it is supreme, continues. How? One of the ideas is scientific advancement. What many people think science, which is basically, of course, an understanding of the natural physical phenomenon, is proof that there is no God, especially with Darwinism, you see. So the fact that as science advances in technology, people, that in many ways erodes the belief in an all-powerful God. Because what do you need God for? What runs the universe isn't God, right? What runs the universe is scientific laws, you see. And this, of course, all started by Darwin, who I always get a kick out of the fact that he was actually not a priest, but he was a pastor, whatever, and so on, you see. In any case, but scientific advancement itself, which has enormously happened in the last, 80 years or whatever, itself advances the proposition that there either is no God or the universe has an alternative reason of how it came about and so on, you see. In fact, the amount of information or science advancement is so great. I once read many years ago that there are 7,500 journal articles which are published daily. Do you imagine that? And therefore the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 5 years. And I read this 30 years ago. Who knows what it is now? We don't even realize the amount of scientific advancement, that there is going on. But for many people, it's proof that God does not exist, because you don't need a God. You can explain it with scientific ideas, you see. So that, again, creates the climate of Yeshud Mavadoi. Another thing that creates the climate, which we are now seeing, is the unbelievable immorality, what's called the LGBTQ+. And this basically started in I think it was 1968. And that is a tremendous slap in the face to holiness. And God calls this immorality, right, abomination. I mean, he calls Mishkav Zocha, which is homosexuality, an abomination. The world has become unbelievably immoral. We've never seen anything like it. Without gender is completely dismissed, you see. Therefore, that, in many ways, is a slap in the face to the Torah. Everybody knows what the Torah stands for, that one of the things it says that homosexuality is forbidden or whatever, but nobody cares. You see, this immorality is not only allowed in today's time, but it is preferred, you see. So all of this is a tremendous advancement of the concept of Yeshid Mavadoi, that a person can do whatever he wants, you see. Now, besides that, we now witness, right, especially in the United States, in many places, the concept of the progressives, liberalism. And I mentioned, I think last week, what is liberalism? Liberalism, right, is basically prikatz oil, to overthrow the yoke of morality, holiness, righteousness, proper behavior. That's really what it is. And that's exactly what's going on in the United States. And the United States, of course, is a beacon to the entire world. So we are really witnessing, in many ways, the end, you see, because this guy, Anthony Kennedy, made the permissiveness of this homosexuality and same-gender marriages, he actually made it constitutional, which means you cannot even undo it, you see. Therefore, we are now witnessing the true Yeshid Mavadoi, where anybody could do whatever he wants and even deny, his biological, reality, which is just incredible. But what's interesting about that is that as mankind rebels against God and the Torah and his morality, which is true of the non-Jews, because they have major religions where they believe in the Bible, and so on. As they do that, God shows them this is what's going to ultimately come about as a result of your own actions, that civilization will be destroyed. And that's what they're doing. They are destroying civilization. It's no more just the immorality that they're practicing, that they have taken, the law into their own hands and so on, to such an extent where norms of civilization, of society, are being overthrown. And take a look, okay? Defund the police. It says in Pirkei Avos that if it was not for the fear of heaven, right, then everybody would swallow each other alive, kill them while they're living, you see, and they wouldn't even wait till they're dead, you see. So how could you defund the police when the police are the only ones that can prevent this? Of course it's irrational. Then they come up with a no bail law, where it means you walk in, and then you walk out, you're released. Before the paperwork is signed, the guy's already out in the street to commit another crime. Are they crazy? Then you have, right, that they don't even stop crime. I think in San Francisco, if you steal less than $950, they don't even bother stopping you. Do we have any idea how that's going to reinforce crime? Then they have cities which are destroyed, right? Portland, Oregon, right? You have LA, you have Chicago, Atlanta. There are cities that are all democratically run, right? And they are being destroyed. Businesses that take years to build are destroyed overnight, and nobody does anything. Then you have all the crime which is increasing. It's rampant. All the murders and the shooting, they're up by 100%. I mean, in Chicago, it's unbelievable what goes on, the murders and the shooting and so on. Who ever heard of something like this? Crime is not being stopped at all. And then, of course, you have the concept that there are no borders. Everybody's allowed to come in. And there are many criminals, you see, that are coming in. Is this normal? And then you have the concept of stimulus checks, which means people don't go to work. And many businesses are having a tremendous difficult time hiring people, you see. And then you have the rise of price, where he stopped the oil industry, so prices are rising all over the place. You have rampant drugs all over. The homeless people are walking all around. You can't believe what's happening to America. It is literally, you can't believe this. You see, what does this mean? What God is allowing and saying, okay, I'm going to give you the illusion of omnipotence. You see, there's an expression in Hebrew, les din, les dayan. We live in a time that there's no judgment, or appears that way. Les dayan, and there's no judge. In other words, we live in a time that God seemingly has completely abandoned his values, his desires for mankind, for civilization. That's the climate. That is the ultimate darkness that has descended on the United States, and I'm not even and the rest of the world, and I'm not even talking about the evil of Iran and China and Russia. It's amazing when you look at it. It's almost like God has disappeared. You know, we never saw that in history. There was always some form of retribution or some kind of stopgap measure, you see. But now anybody can do whatever they want, you see. And this is what's happening. This type of climate or environment is an equivalent to the Dor HaMabul, because God let, and I explained that previously, God let the Mabul, the generation of the Mabul, He let them do whatever they want, you see. So what did they do? They brought civilization to its knees, and God said enough. Why? Because, like I mentioned previously, that the generation of the Mabul was really supposed to be the generation right by the Mashiach, because God wanted to bring a tikkun to all the 10 spheres and 10 generations, and therefore the Orishan would have come down. Instead, the water, which is the physical analog of the Messianic light, that came down and destroyed. But it's the same climate, you see, which is what? That climate is where they could do whatever they want. Less din, but less dayan. There's no judgment, no justice, and there's no judge. This is the climate that we now live in. But that type of a climate can only happen in an extreme form before the Mashiach comes. In many ways, it's good news and bad news, right? The bad news is we are watching the annihilation and the deterioration of civilization. I mean, every day that goes by, we actually cannot believe what is happening, you see. Just incredible to watch. I just heard that they signed a law in New York State that anybody can write on their birth certificate whatever gender they want. Doesn't make a difference if you're born a man or a woman, your biological reality. No. You could declare yourself, if you're a man, you could say you're a woman. Or if you're a woman, you could say you're a man. You're actually legally allowed to put that on your birth certificate. Now, who could ever dream that this would happen? It's contrary to nature. It doesn't make sense. We live truly in what's called an Alice in Wonderland. America has become a wonderland, completely irrational. This kind of a climate where it looks like God has completely abandoned the earth, where mankind has now taken over the entire earth, and they now do whatever they want, to the extent where everything is irrational. It doesn't make sense, you see? And we're shocked. How can people that don't look like they're stupid, you know, we're talking about the Congress, Supreme Court, right, the White House, how could they do this kind of stuff? What did they do? They just woke up one day and they said, you know, we want to pass these laws that will destroy the United States. We want to cancel culture. It's absurd. This is what's happening. This type of environment can only happen at the end. And this is what the Memtes Shari Tumah looks like, you see. It is a time when mankind completely rules without any deterrent to what he wants to do. And when he rules, everything becomes irrational. And that's what's happening. So the bad news is that this is actually happening now. The good news is that this can only happen if it's right before the Mashiach. It can only happen if it's the Memtes Shari Tumah, if it's the 49 levels of defilement, you see. So in a certain sense, it's good news, but we are watching, we can't even believe it. And like I mentioned previously, that is why people in the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan and so on, that's why they said, let him come, let the Mashiach come, but I don't want to see it. Because they knew what would happen. They knew that the climate before the Mashiach comes has to be so gross, so bad, that it defies rationality and logic. And they didn't want to be a part of it, and so on. It's one thing to be part of a civilization that sins. It's another thing to be part of a civilization that has lost its way completely and that it is violating nature and so on and can become completely irrational. In fact, U.S. is no longer the U.S. It is United Sodom. U.S., United Sodom. America has become Sodom, you see, which was a civilization that was completely irrational. And because it was such, God said, I will destroy it. It's not only the evil of Sodom, it was worse than that, because they practiced laws and ideas that were contrary to the existence of civilization. For instance, if somebody would steal, then the one who had to pay the thief was the victim himself, because if he didn't have that item, then the guy would never have taken it. Is this normal? This was Sodom. I'm not even talking about all the other terrible things that they did. And in the end, God said, I will take them out. And he did. And when he took them out, it was an unbelievable physical event. We don't even know what it was. Was it an earthquake? And so on. But in any case, he took them out. The good news is that this cannot go on for a long time. I'm not even talking about the fact that Judaism is dying. 11 million Jews are gone. Imagine 70% of non-religious Jews intermarry. Could you imagine what that means? How long could the Jewish people survive? It is Judaism that is dying. If that's almost 80% of the Jewish people are gone. No Shabbos, no Taras Mishpacha, no Kashrus. And the insane people, as part of the government of Israel, they want to eradicate Judaism. If they could, they would destroy Judaism. The Arabs want to destroy the Jews. The Arab want to destroy Judaism. It's astounding who the enemies of God really are. But like I say, this is what's happening. The question is, how long will God tolerate the destruction of his world that he created, in order to allow mankind to earn an eternal place with infinite bliss in the future world? Not long. And this is where we're at. So we now understand something very important. What the climate is before the end. And like I mentioned a long time ago, the concept of the window, that there's a certain amount of divine energy that comes down, you see. And as time goes on, right, the necessity for suffering and darkness enters because of the Memtes Shari Tumah. So symbolically what that means is that the window begins to close, right, blocking the divine flow of Kedusha, holiness or energy, until it reaches a point which is right before it closes. So 1 nanometer space is left. If the window closes, which means that the Kedusha is blocked completely, then the entire universe is destroyed automatically, because it needs that inflow of Kedusha. So therefore, that's the space at the end. Could you imagine what that space looks like? Could you imagine what the world looks like when there's only 1 nanometer of space left before the window closes? You're looking at it. This world is the world of the space being 1 nanometer. Yeah, because it's not just the world of sinning. It's much worse than that. It's a world in which God is enormously desecrated. That the people view God, if they view him at all, because religion is on the way out for many people, where they view God as irrelevant or non-existent. Chil Hashem, God has been ultimately, extremely desecrated. That's part of that world. But it's also a world where society is now irrational, where they are doing things which cannot promote benefit. It will destroy society. Take a look at what all that means. This is what the Windows closing a nanometer left. Well, so in a certain sense, that's good news. Because the worse it gets, the closer we are to the Mashiach. And we are very close. Any questions?
So, the 3 events that happened recently with Meron, the one in the shul in Israel, on Shavuot,
Stolen, yeah.
and then now the one in Florida. If they're all the same thing, that they were all falling down, separation.
It's all like collapsing. People being crushed.
Giving us the same punishment over and over again.
Yes. So obviously, the message is basically the same. And I said, quite a while ago when I talked about Meron, that I believe the message is that there's a tremendous amount of sinas chinam, baseless hatred, and also lashon hara that destroys the Jewish people. And I brought a whole series of proofs in that lecture. Yeah. I believe that's why.
Rabbi, is that a lot of people are not threading these events together.
They're not.
Yes.
They're not connecting it. Like the people who are searching for more, yes, they do. But the people who are trying to, the Hashem's trying to wake up, most of those people are really not adding the putting the dots together.
Correct. That's the problem. Most people don't realize there's a divine plan.
So are more things going to have to happen until they, why? If Hashem keeps bringing us suffering for them to wake up, but they're not waking up. So now we're going to have to continue suffering until and continue until they decide to wake up from a coma?
Well, you have one of two things. Either tragically suffering may continue, in other ways, or somehow they'll get the message. Somehow God will enable them to get the message.
Saying that he feels that they were all falling, which is like they fell in Meron, they fell in the shul, the building fell. He said it's all sikila, stoning. He said that's onesh for Mechilal Shabbat, not keeping the Shabbat. But then I told him at the same time they all had strangulation, chenek, they couldn't breathe. And now in the building there was a fire, which is set at fire. I feel like it's all the punishments from Hashem coming.
Yes, correct.
Decapitation in this building. They're finding human body parts.
Yeah, because everybody was crushed. Sure.
So this is like it's all the cardinal punishment in one.
Yeah, in a certain sense, yes. But like I say, I look at the it's not the falling. I look at the strangulation as the key method of execution, which is what happened in all of them.
Even Corona.
Including Corona, yes. And I said a long time ago, when Corona started, that Corona
we were in the middle of it.
Yeah, is because of, again, the same concept. There's a tremendous amount of lashon hara daily to all the newspapers, all the people, the internet. Everybody's killing everybody else. Everybody There are so many people that are bad-mouthing other people. You know, in the old days, you spoke Lashon Hara to one person. With the internet, you can speak to 1 million people in the same instance. Much worse. You see.
So when you said that there's 2 ways for Hashem to wake them up, it's either continue with more suffering until they wake up, or another way. What's that other way?
Well, like I said, maybe somebody will get the message out, and somehow God will, allow that message or a person, whatever, to get out the concept of Shmiras HaLashon in some way. Yeah, that's right.
Like the person like Mashiach, or the person like a random?
It could be Mashiach, obviously disguised as a regular guy. Could be. That would make sense.
So like what do we take from these like these events that keep going on and on, that like people are like not losing hope, but they're losing they're more confusion. It's making people more confused, more, especially like with what's coming out of they're not sure if it was deliberately fell down the building, or if it wasn't, or if it was government officials that did it. All these things that are coming out little by little, it causes more confusion for people. Like, what do?
Yeah, could you imagine when Moshe Rabbeinu came to Egypt? He said to the people that he was the Mashiach. He didn't hide it. He said, "I'm the guy," and he told them, "Poko Yivkoid." Serach Basosha said that's what the Mashiach says. He said it. So everybody knew he was the Mashiach. What happens next? Paroi sends them all packing to gather straw. Can you imagine the confusion and the hopelessness and the desperation of the Jewish people for those couple of months? Same thing. What God wants, I think, ultimately, is this is a supreme test of bitachon. It's a very important test, and it's a very important character trait to trust in God. You see, He wants you to have bitachon, that no matter what you see, it's all part of the divine plan, right, to bring the Mashiach. Even though it looks terrible, you see. And we don't understand how, obviously, but this is part of the bitachon. Look, how many Jews in the Holocaust? Can you imagine being in that situation, in Auschwitz or whatever? There were many people, there are many, many stories of Jews that had tremendous bitachon. Tremendous bitachon. The greater the situation which is hopeless, and you have bitachon, the greater is the reward. So in a certain sense, that's what God wants. He wants the bitachon that the Jews have to have, that no matter what they see, it's all part of the divine agenda. And everything in the end will be great. But I want to tell you something. It says that, whatever the measure of evil is, or suffering, that the measure of good is 500 times the measure of suffering. Now, could you imagine? You're looking at a measure of evil, of destruction, right? Which is unbelievable. That's how great it is. So could you imagine when the Mashiach comes, that the measure of good, right, is going to be 500 times that's multiplied, right? It's unbelievable. So if you have a measure of suffering that's 1,000, right, that means the measure of good, right, is going to be, what is it going to be, 100 times 1,000, right? What is that, 50,000, not 50, 500,000, whatever, right? That's how much good there will be. as a compensation for what God did. But remember, this is a test of bitachon. And in many ways it separates the people, the men from the children from the adults. You see? So you have to be boteach. You have to hang in there, no matter what happens, and say, Gam zu l'tova. This too is for the good. Or as it says, Kol milsa de'oved rachmana. Everything that God does, the tav of it, He does for good. That's what's required. And this is what was required of the Jewish people, right? Same idea. When Moshe Rabbeinu came, announced himself as the Mashiach, and he failed to deliver, right, for a good couple of months. The greater the bitachon, the greater is the reward that you will receive when the whole thing ends. So that's what it's all about. And that was the same thing by Kriyas Yamsuf. Imagine their back is to the sea, and in front of them is the Egyptian army. Naturally, they were finished. The army is a tremendous army. What was that, 600 war chariots with weapons and all that? And who are all these people? They're running away from Egypt as slaves, right? So what God wanted is bitachon. Don't worry, you have to trust me, you see? And they did, until Nachshon ben Aminadav, right? He jumped into the sea. Moshe Rabbeinu says, go into the sea. He jumped in, and it went all the way up to his nose or his mouth, whatever, and all of a sudden the sea split, because the Rebbeinu Shem needed somebody to demonstrate an unbelievable measure of bitachon. And in that merit of the bitachon of the Jewish people, they were saved. Same idea. The Rebbeinu Shem wants us to trust Him, no matter what we see. You see. And it's the same thing that happened in Mitzrayim. No different. See?
Rabbi, tonight, the U.S. forces in Syria were attacked by multiple rockets.
By who? Iran?
What?
Who attacked them?
I don't know. Obviously, probably, I would guess Iran.
Well, that's great news. And maybe it'll wake up the idiots who inhabit the State Department. How they could make a deal with Iran, and allow Iran to build a bomb is beyond. It's just beyond rationality. How they don't see what Iran is. That all Iran is interested in is becoming the old Persia, to dominate the Middle East and ultimately a caliphate of the entire world. How they don't understand that is beyond belief. Anybody else, would have taken out Iran, just destroyed them. And by the way, it's very easy to destroy Iran, because you don't have to destroy the people. All you have to do is bomb the infrastructure and send them back to the cavemen. You see? It's very, very easy to do. And nobody cares. Nobody wants to do it. I always find it incredible how Iran, one nation, can hold the entire world hostage and get away with everything that they do. Murder people. Murder their own people. You see? And to antagonize and to destroy all the nations in the Middle East. It's just incredible how the world tolerates this. But don't worry. We will all witness a day when justice will be done. Where God will say, enough is enough. I'm now going to judge the world, and you will see what happens. For those who would like to, check out the Haftorah of Parshas Nitzavim. That was the Haftorah of World Trade Center bomb, the 9/11. And in there it says a very interesting, the Pasuk says that Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah, saw God in the prophetic vision, that God was, I think, riding on a horse, and his clothing, the image, where the clothing that he was wearing was stained red with blood. So Yeshayahu was very nervous because he thought that maybe this means that God is going to punish the Jews, because that's usually what it means. And God said, no. The reason why my clothing are stained with blood, red, is because I have just crushed Edom like a winemaker crushing his grapes, and all the wine, right, spurts out of the grapes. I've just done that to Edom, right, because of the sins of what they've done. Guess what? That is exactly what's going to happen to the liberals, the Democrats, the progressives, right? And all the people who are terribly trying to destroy the United States and destroy the morality. I mean, until now, America has always been a moral country. They are trying to destroy it. So that's what's going to happen. That prophecy of Haftorah, of Nitzavim, take a look at that, you see? And that will come. Same thing with Iran. All of them will be crushed, ultimately. God just has to wait to accomplish what he wants, which means that there's a certain amount of darkness that has to happen before he ends the entire program. You see?
So, all this stuff is going to come to light. Even like they say that, I don't know if it's true, but they say like the 9/11 wasn't really a terrorist attack. The United States knew about it. Whatever it is that's hidden from the government, from the people, all that's going to come to the light of things.
Oh yeah, all of that will be revealed. Everything. Yeah. Everything.
So
all the evil that has been done
about Hashem and the Torah, but also like our, whatever the what is it called? The matrix that we're all living in right now. That's all going to come to light as well.
Correct. Yes. That's what it means. Vengeance of God is not only punishment, it's also revelation. It's both. Because God has to show that what he's doing is just. And therefore he has to reveal the nature, the quantity, and the quality of the evil and the sins of the nations of the world. He just doesn't want to punish them. He has to reveal why he's doing it. Therefore, there's going to be an unbelievable enlightenment of mankind when they realize the evil that governments have done for thousands of years, you see.
When you say revelation, it's not going to be like an epiphany. It's going to be like it's going to come out in the news. All the information is going to be leaked. That's the revelation, right?
Well, yeah, we don't exactly know how it will be revealed, but it will be, because right. God is going to justify what he's doing to the nations of the world. So all of it has to come out, you see. Whether it be consciousness, whether it be prophecy, we don't know how it's going to be revealed. But it will be revealed. Because one of the requirements of justice is you need to justify what you're doing. That's one of the requirements of justice, and therefore all of that will be known to mankind, you see.
Now, these revelations can't start until the window closes? Until it almost closes and the gate opens?
Yeah, all these revelations cannot start until the gate opens. What happens is the window reaches its bottom point, let's say a nanometer, and then the instant before it closes, the gate opens, or else the whole world would cease. That opening of the gate is the Pekidah. All of a sudden, the Mashiach ben Yosef is released from his prison. And once that happens, then it's just a matter of time. Then redemption begins, and it's a process. just like Egypt, where redemption begins, and it took a while. But once it began, there was no backtrack at all, and it just destroyed Egypt. Totally.
So, Rabbi, this gate and this window, where is it located? In which olam? And where is it?
Well, it's located in Malchus.
Malchut.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the Shefa that comes down from the sphere of Yesod, and it goes into Malchus, and that's what's blocked. The Shefa, which is the divine energy or the flow, comes from Yesod, right? Because you have 10 spheres, all the way from Kessin, Chochmah, Bina, right? Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, 9 of them, and all of them pour their energies, their holiness, the divine energies, into Malchus. Malchus is the place of the world, and that's being blocked. So when Yesod is released, is opened, you see, that's the Pekidah. It's opened, it's like a faucet, where all the water from the reservoir to all the pipes that lead from the reservoir to your house, right? They can go 100 miles, right? Then it goes into your house, goes into the pipes of your house, and it ends at the faucet. But the faucet is closed. So the faucet is Yesod. And the reservoir, actually it's not even the reservoir. The real reservoir of water is not the reservoir, it is the clouds. That's the origin, basically. And even that, there's an origin called the sea, where all the waters evaporate, and then they go up, form clouds, and then they condense, and then they drop again. But without getting into the whole, mechanism, ultimately the faucet is the Yesod. And the Malchus, where it pours into, is a keli, a vessel, which is put underneath the faucet. So as long as that faucet is closed, nothing is going to pour into the Malchus. But when that faucet is open, all the water pours into Malchus, you see? So this is what happens. You see?
So now, we just started the 3 weeks. We had the fast yesterday. What would you tell us, how could we, because during the 3 weeks, don't they say that there is a vast amount of joy, happiness, a good energy, but it's that we can't tap into that yet, and eventually one day these weeks of sadness will turn into happiness and joy. So how can is there a way to allow ourselves to connect to that shefa, to bring it down to us versus connecting to the negativity of the 3 weeks?
Yeah. I believe the way you can connect to the joy of what will happen is what's called bitochen, trust. You need to trust that no matter what happens, God will reverse all the evil, and therefore you look forward to the ultimate revelation. You see, not because you want to have a good time, but the reason why you want to look forward to the revelation is because then you will have an extraordinary relationship with God. That's the beauty, It's not because you want to enjoy what the revelation will bring, Tanug, which itself is interesting. But the real idea is you want to see God. You want to reconnect. You want to enjoy the closeness that you can get by being together with Him. You see? That's a tremendous chut, merit. And therefore, you have bitochen that everything will ultimately wind its way to tremendous toiv, tremendous goodness. So you ask God that you should be zoicha, you should merit to live to see the re-entry of God into the creation. You see, because you want to establish a relationship with him, you see, because that's how much you love God. And you never know. You'll be Zoicha to see the Mashiach.
That when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a war and Rome will be completely destroyed. So we still have to wait for a big major war.
Yes,
No?
Yes, there will be a major war.
So I think maybe the Syria garbage, it might become a world war. Like
I believe there will be a war between Iran and Israel. Yes.
And America.
And America, but that's only if Trump is president. If Biden is president, he's not going to do anything. He may not even know there is a war. That's how senile he is. What was that?
Wait, you didn't hear you. Say it again.
It says, and on that day, everyone's going to know Hashem is one and His name is one. Correct? So that's
correct.
Oh.
That is what?
Europe will be involved in this war.
Correct, yes. Edom. Edom is Russia, Europe, and America. All three parts are Edom.
Of Syria, correct?
What was that?
Isn't Russia on the side with Syria? Doesn't Syria get their arms also from Russia?
Yes. But Russia and Europe is the evil. Russia and Europe is the evil of Edom. And America is the Toiv Sheba Edom that has been transferred so far to the evil. The Satan is trying to take over America. He's trying to take away the Toiv Sheba Esav and replace it with the evil of Esav, which I mentioned a long time ago. That what you are watching is the desire of the Satan, because he's dying. That's why he wants to take away the Toiv Sheba Esav and replace it with the evil of Esav. We are watching the evil of Esav. All these guys, the whole, the government, the evil, the Democratic Party, the liberals, just all these people. These people are Esav, the evil of Esav. But eventually they will be thrown out. And then the good part of Esav will return. It's only temporary, you see. And once that happens, then I believe then Esav will be good. Hopefully it will be Trump. Then he's going to do incredible things for the Jewish people and to advance their entire Hatzlacha. You see. Okay.
You think it's Trump?
Yeah, I think it's Trump.
Do you think he's coming back?
Yes.
Really?
Well, it said in the Torah, in the Bible code, that he's going to win Pa'amayim.
He's going to what?
They found that in the Bible code. Just he didn't win this time, maybe the next time.
What did they find in the Bible code?
She said in the Bible code it said that Trump will win Pa'amayim.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is just what's called an interruption. That's all it is.
Oh, we're in a holding pattern at the moment.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're doing. We are holding because there's a concept of the Shechad Satan, that God has allowed the Satan to, reinforce his troops, as they say, because of his tremendous kitrug. This is Shechad Satan, which is part of the evil, the end, and that's why it's so dark. You see, because God has allowed the Satan to reemerge. But that's only a certain amount of time. And then they will be destroyed. So, but that's basically what it is. All it is it's an interruption in what should have continued. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu. He should have gone, told Paroi, and the Makkah should have started right then. But it didn't. Because like I said, when you are in the Memtesh Shari Tumah, 49 levels of defilement, it cannot continue You've got to have a kapara. You must balance the books. You've got to get rid of all the sins that is stopping the redemption. There is no other way, you see. And the way to do that, of course, is suffering. We are doing the exact same thing that happened by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's an interruption. You see?
So
okay.
You said they were counting in Arizona. When do they get the results?
I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's going to be it's going to have to be momentary, because they've been already working on it for 3 months. How long does it take to count 2 million votes? But They're doing, obviously, a very thorough job. Look, when that comes out, and if it comes out that there was a fraud, that's going to be a constitutional crisis. Because what it means is that once there's a fraud perpetrated in one state, now you have to have the other states check also, you see. And if 2 or 3 states check and it's a fraud, then Biden is gone. That means he's an illegitimate president. Not only that, but all his rulings, everything he signed, his bills, they are gone. They are illegal because they were not signed by the president. And that is going to be an unbelievable crisis, right? And the left is going to go bananas because they just lost their battle. And the interesting thing about that is that when Trump comes back, see, the problem with Trump is he was naive. You know, he did not realize the evil of what's called the deep state. He doesn't realize what that is, but now he does. And he sees the unbelievable evil, what they did to him, to destroy his ability to be the president, even while he's the president, you see. So he now realizes that. And I believe when he comes back, he's going to go after all of these people the way he should have done the first time, with an incredible vengeance, you see. Because he now realizes they have destroyed him. It's unbelievable what they have done. And the only way to stop it is to stop them. What was that? What?
They disbarred Mayor Giuliani without even a hearing.
Yeah, because it's all the deep state. Yeah. Look, we don't realize how evil these people are because we're good people. It's very hard for a good person to realize the depths of evil, you know? We can't believe. I mean, if somebody told you, you know, before the Holocaust that somebody's going to bake Jews in an oven, would you believe this? No. You would not have believed that mankind can be so evil, depraved. No. That you should know that's what evil relies on, that you don't realize how evil they are. So they can get away with everything because you do not safeguard yourself. This is the problem. That's one of the strategies of evil, in some way to fool you that they're not so bad. Okay, they differ, but they're not so bad. We don't realize how bad they are and that they never hesitate to do evil. The problem with the good is it always hesitates. Evil never hesitates. And evil is absolutely ruthless. And I think Trump has, as they say, he's woke to realize how bad they are. You've got to stop the deep state with whatever power he has.
But how does
or else,
Trump,
what?
How does Trump fall into the story of Mashiach? Like, how does Trump coming back fall into the story of Mashiach? Because isn't it when Mashiach comes, everyone goes against him? I feel like Trump would approve of him.
Well, Trump is not the Mashiach.
No, I know that.
He's a messianic figure as part of the program. He's a Mashiach of Edom. You know, he's a major character in the transformation of Edom, Esav, because God wants to allow Esav to be part of the Geula. But he's not the Mashiach, of course not. But he is a messianic figure who plays a major part. What was that?
What I'm trying to say is that, let's say like what you're saying, Trump comes back into power, right? But during the time of the Mashiach, when the Mashiach does arrive, and he's well known, what they say is that all the nations are going to go against him. But I don't see Trump going against him. I feel like Trump would be supportive of the Mashiach, whoever he is.
Well, we don't really know. You see, we don't know. We don't know what the Baruch has done to the war of Gog and Magog. He may have substituted it for another nation, because we find that he can do that. Chizkiyahu HaMelech, right? He was supposed to be Mashiach, and Sancheiriv was supposed to be Gog and Magog. So we see that it can be, transformed. It could be another nation that will carry out that idea. The reason why it didn't happen is because he did not sing Shira, which is really amazing when you think about that. But anyway, so we don't really know what the Baruch has done. I believe Gog and Magog is really the UN. And they're always plotting against the Jewish people. You believe that the Jewish people are trying to defend themselves, Israel, against Hamas? And these guys are arguing if Israel has the right to defend themselves? Are they crazy? I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. I believe that's who Gog and Magog is. It's the UN that is constantly subjecting Israel to a double standard. And they're always against Jerusalem, that we know. So maybe that's it. They have taken the part, they have played the part of Gog and Magog, and therefore there will be no Gog and Magog. It's already been done. That's a real possibility, by the way.
Amen. Hope so.
Okay. Wow.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, it was a great class.
Okay. I hope I've clarified a lot of ideas.
Definitely so.
But the main thing is hang in there, have bitochen.